Welcome to the Open Forum. Once again, how wonderful it is that we can look together into the Word of God as we're plunging ahead toward the very end of time. Just think, 123 days and Judgment Day and the rapture, the catching up of the true believers will be here. You know, we talk again and again about passing out tracts in our cities, and we encourage this throughout the world. We have a friend who has been passing out tracts for some time in the country of Madagascar. Now, I learn here that he is an English teacher in a seminary of a major denomination in Madagascar. And he just sent us a letter that is so interesting, and it shows the power and what God might do with the tracts that are given out. This is something that, in my judgment, is something I never expected we would hear. He says, I teach English in a seminary of one of the major churches in Madagascar. This past Friday, we were having a meeting. Then the president, and I presume that's the president of the seminary, handed out tracts in French to us about Judgment Day. I said, I have tracts in Malagasy. That is the language of Madagascar. He said to me that foreigners gave them out in October. This is where the president has received these tracts that he was passing out. He had received them from foreigners in October. I said, I have tracts in Malagasy, and he was surprised too, and he wanted me to bring them to distribute to church members. But the tracts that is Family Radio, has sent to me were very few. But now one door is opened because the congregation or the denomination has about 100,000 members in it. And the president is interested in spreading out the knowledge of Judgment Day, and therefore I need many more tracts. I wonder if you can send a great quantity to me. And of course, that's all going to be arranged very quickly. But just think about this now. Some foreigners, a little tract team of some kind, last October was in Madagascar passing out tracts. And this English teacher in a seminary took one and began to get very interested and began to pass them, made arrangements with us to get more so that he could pass them out. And now even the president of the seminary of that denomination wants to pass them out. My, what is God doing? And so don't ever think that passing out tracts is not important. This happens to be a super excellent situation, and of course we are working now with them to get them as many tracts as they can possibly use. Incidentally, the same English teacher said, besides, now I have an appointment with the journalists of the most read newspaper in Madagascar. Please pray that something great will happen. And again, the news is getting out in that country in a tremendous way. And so, right now, for example, we have Prophet Jonah, Project Jonah, in which people who want to donate the remaining 123 days, that's today, tomorrow it'll be 122 days, to go to with a team to go to this country or that country, and we have people now in many countries that are passing out tracts. If you would like to make an application to be part of that, you can look on your website, familyradio.com, and ask for the Prophet Jonah, Project Jonah application. Or if you don't have a website, you can call Family Radio, 1-800-543-1494, and ask for the Project Jonah connection, and we will immediately send you an application. And we are interested in as many people as possible that can do this, and we are paying virtually all the expenses for this. Of course, those who make application have to qualify. We have to be very careful that when we send people out, they work well with each other, with other people. They've had some experience passing out tracts, and so on. But I can't. It's thrilling. It's thrilling to get a letter like this and to see how God is using our puny efforts of trying to get the message out into the world, that it is being multiplied by many other people. And we're so grateful to hear about this. And let's be praying for those missionaries, because everyone that goes out is a missionary, believe you me, that God will be with them and bless their efforts. Some of our people are going into fairly dangerous countries, and they have to be very, very careful as they are passing out tracts or as they are passing out a card that encourages people to listen to FamilyRadio.com or to the radio station that happens to the shortwave radio or the medium wave radio station that happens to be broadcasting in that area from Family Radio. Well, so much for a report, but it's a very unique report, and it should encourage all of us to become more interested in this kind of activity, because we are commanded in Ezekiel 33 and in Ezekiel 3 to warn the world, and at the same time to tell the world that not only that Judgment Day is about here, but also that God is still saving people today, and we can encourage people to cry out to God for mercy, cry out to God for mercy, because they don't have to know anything from the Bible except to hear something at all, just like the words Judgment Day come from the Bible and come very humbly. And it's possible, there's no guarantee, but it's possible that some of them will also become saved. But now we're going to go to our program, and we're going to begin with our first caller. Welcome to Open Forum.
Good night.
Welcome to Open Forum.
Good night. I have one question for your world campaign.
Yes.
What is the color of leprosy?
What is the color of leprosy?
Leprosy.
I think it is kind of a white color, but I can't say that. I think according to the Bible, it's kind of a white color.
The Bible said when they had leprosy, their skin became whiter than snow. So why on Family Radio do you teach that Moses got married to a Cushite woman, while Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1 to 4, say that he was married to an Ethiopian woman, and an Ethiopian woman is supposed to be a black woman?
Well, no, I'm sorry. Now you're getting into several subjects here, but Moses was married to. Excuse me. Let me try to speak to this. Moses was married to Zipporah, who was a Cushite. Actually, in the Hebrew language, that we get the word Ethiopian area. They were called Cushites, and she was not from a descendant of Abraham. She was from the Midianites, who were also apparently called Cushites, and so he was. What the color of her skin was, we have no indication in the Bible at all. And but Moses, but insofar as leprosy is concerned, it is his sister, Moses' sister, who disobeyed God, and God's made her a leper for 7 days, and that's another story. But his wife, Zipporah, she never did have leprosy.
They cursed Moses because he married to an Ethiopian woman, and she's a black woman, and you won't say in your family radio that the woman was a Cushite.
I'm sorry, what is your question?
Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1 to 4.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't help you any further. I think I've tried to help you as far as I can go. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yeah, Mr. Campbell, Hebrew. Anyway, the main one I really want you to read is Romans 2:15.
You want me to read Hebrews 2:15?
No, Romans.
Romans 2:15?
Yes.
All right, let's look at that. Romans chapter 2, verse 15. There we read, let's start with verse 14. For the Gentiles, that is the nations that are not Jewish at all, which have not the law, that is, they don't have the Bible, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show, this is verse 15, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. Now, what is your question?
Yeah, my question concerns a comment somebody made the other time about why he was admonishing you. Why is it that God will have to punish those who don't read or who don't have a Bible or who don't read Bible and who don't know how to read? But here God is saying, both Hebrew and Jeremiah, that the word of God is written in everybody's house. There should be no alibis or excuses for not knowing about God's word, whether you're illiterate or not.
Yeah, now let me try to help you. The Bible indicates that mankind was created in the image of God, in the likeness of God. And God created us as a spiritual being. We're different than an animal. We not only have a physical body and the breath of life, but we have also a spiritual soul. And in our soul, even though Adam rebelled, we still have the leftovers of the fact that God's law is written there to some degree. Intuitively, mankind knows it's wrong to murder. They know it's wrong to commit adultery. They know it's wrong to lie or to steal without ever reading the Bible. They know that. And so mankind stands guilty before God, even though they have never read the Bible, because the law of God is written on man's heart to some degree. And so that's why then the proof of it is that every human being that has come into existence eventually died. And a great many of them never heard anything from the Bible, but God's law to that degree was written on their heart, and so they were still under the wrath of God because the wages of sin is death, and sin is the transgression of God's law. So they still stand guilty, and the proof of it is that every human being that has come on the face of the earth eventually has died, except for a couple men that were caught up to be with Christ. But that's a separate issue.
But do you see in 15 how their conscience is being punish them for the lies and the sins they have committed? That's why I mentioned Romans 15, because aside from what you just said, even though they haven't read the Bible, the law they have violated about God, disobedience to God, is punishing them. You see how under 15
excuse me, God's law is written on their hearts. They know they are doing wrong. They know intuitively, because God's law has been put on and is part of their creation. They know there is a God. They know there is a judgment day coming sometime. Like today, there's no human being that can say, "Oh, I don't know anything about judgment." In their heart, they know, and that's why there's a lot of fear developing all over the world. Great fear, because they intuitively know that they have to answer somehow to a higher being. They don't know any of the details like we can know when we have the Bible, but nevertheless they know enough so that they know they are guilty before God. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Ezekiel.
Yes, Ezekiel, go ahead.
38.
Ezekiel 38, let's turn to that. Ezekiel 38, and which verse?
18 to 23.
18, let's turn to that. Ezekiel 38, verse 18. And it shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord Jehovah, that my fury shall come up in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fish of the sea, the fowls of the heaven, and the beasts of the field, and all creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all the men that are upon the face of the earth, shall shake at my presence. And the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. Now, what is your question?
Is this about Judgment Day?
This is about Judgment Day. This is a very, very picturesque, a very dramatic statement of what Judgment Day is. It parallels what we read in Revelation chapter 16, where it says that there, in verse 18, there will be a great earthquake, which was not since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake, and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon, that's the whole kingdom of Satan, came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And that's talking about the character of Judgment Day, which begins with this great shaking. And that is necessary in order that the tombs will be thrown open, so that 2 things will happen. The bodies of the true believers, or whatever remains are there, will come out and be in their glorified spiritual bodies, where those individuals will be caught up to heaven, and all the remains of the unsaved will be thrown out to be shamed in the eyes of God.
Yeah, I see that everybody's going to shake at his presence when he comes.
Yeah, it's really is a very descriptive, and I thank you very much for calling our attention to Ezekiel 38, verse 18. And thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum. Welcome.
Yeah, you know that the verse in Thessalonians, be not ignorant of this very thing. Do you know exactly where that's at?
Being ignorant of it. You're talking about.
Yeah,
don't be ignorant. That verse is 2 Peter, chapter 3, verse 8. Beloved, don't be ignorant of this one thing, that a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. Now, what is your question?
Well, my question is that the people he wrote to back then, they read that verse, didn't they? Read that verse, or was that verse not addressed? Was it? Because was that verse addressed to them or not, or just to other people who are, going to be leaving on the 21st of May?
Oh, I see. You see, the whole Bible was written not just to the people that it was written to at that time.
It wasn't written just to people who it was written to. Oh, okay, that makes sense. I got that. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, now let me try to explain here. The Bible was written for the whole human race. God used particular incidents or conversations or historical facts as the message, or to illustrate or help develop the message of the Bible, but it was not, a lot of the time, it was not understood at all by the people to whom it was addressed, but slowly on it is to be understood by anybody who is carefully searching the Bible. And in our day, we have particular advantage because much of the Bible, God has written about it in such a way that nobody could understand it until our day. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, hello, Brother Camping. Could you read Romans 1:18 through 20?
Romans 1:18 to 20. All right, let's look at that. Romans 1, verse 18 to 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now, what is your question?
It was just a comment on the caller earlier that was saying about that men didn't have the Bible or something, but from what I read here, men are without excuse. If they just look around them and see God's glory, we know there's a God. Is that right in saying this verse?
You are very correct about that, and I thank you. Like we read in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. And it's also emphasized here in Romans 1. And so anybody, if they're honest about it, have to agree that there must be some kind of a huge divine mind, a fantastic mind that was able to create this magnificent earth with all of its life forms that are so complex. And who that is, they may not know, but it has to be somebody that is infinite in his power and his majesty.
Yes, all glory to God. You have a wonderful evening.
Well, thank you. Thank you for calling and sharing. And, that's a pity that today we live in this beautiful world, and as scientists probe into the depths of the ocean and find all kinds of new life forms there, they penetrate in the deep jungles of the world, and they find again many, many new life forms, and wherever they look, wherever they turn, there's also something new, and everything is very complex. Nothing is simple. Nothing that they can understand how it ever could have come into existence except by that crazy idea that it just came through millions of years or billions of years by adaptation, and there's absolutely zero proof of that. But thank you for calling and sharing, and shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, Exodus chapter 31, verse 13, please.
Exodus chapter 31, verse 13. Let's look at that.
13 through 17.
Exodus 31, verse 13. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I, the Jehovah, is that doth sanctify you. And ye shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to Jehovah. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Now, what is your question? Oh, I have to pause. Now, we have a caller on the line who has a question about the seventh-day Sabbath observance. And what is your question?
My question is if you could compare that with Matthew chapter 5, 17 through 19.
Matthew
and
5, 17
through
to 19. Matthew 5. Matthew 5, 17 to 19. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, what is your question?
Why do you teach your sheeple that the Sunday is the Sabbath when it is Saturday, the seventh day?
Because,
Brother
you see...
Harold, thank you.
Yes. The problem is, you have to read the whole Bible in order to understand any part of the Bible. You cannot just take a few verses and build your doctrine or your understanding, because the Bible teaches we are to compare spiritual with spiritual. And the fact is, when we go to Matthew 28 and verses in Mark and Luke, God teaches that the era of the seventh-day Sabbath ended that Sunday morning when Christ rose from the grave, and that was the beginning of a new era of Sabbaths. And so God himself has told us that. Secondly, the seventh-day Sabbath, God says, was a sign. It was a sign. It was not part of the moral law. It was pointing to the fact that you are not to to do any work in trying to get yourself saved. That's why in Deuteronomy 5, it talks about keeping the seventh-day Sabbath, because God took Israel out of Egypt with a high hand and brought them into the land of Canaan, and that was a dramatic picture of salvation. And we have to harmonize all of these passages, and then we realize the seventh-day Sabbath, which was to be observed for the first 11,000 years of the history of the world until the time of Christ, that it was a sign pointing to something, and God defined what it pointed to. It was pointing to the fact that I, the Lord, sanctify you, that I am the one that make you saved. And that fits precisely with what we read in Deuteronomy 5 about you keep the seventh-day Sabbath because I brought you out of Egypt into the land of Canaan with a high hand. And unless you include all that information, you are not reading the Bible. You're only reading some of the verses. And I feel very sorry for these dear people who have been taught, and this has been driven home, and a lot of it came in, at least in one denomination, through Ellen G. White, who had a vision of a circle or some kind of a halo around the fourth commandment about the seventh day, and so they were listening to her as if, in that denomination, as if that was the Word of God, and that is in total violation of Revelation chapter 18. We're not to add to the words of the prophecy of this book. So on many counts, it is a whole teaching that is just terrible. It's altogether contrary to the Word of God, I'm sorry to say. But thank you.
Perpetual and forever means that it is permanent. It is not to be changed. Now, the Pope changed it, and you are trying to change it. The law of God is continually on our hearts, on our minds. It is the perfect 10, will never be abolished. You are leading your sheeple into breaking the law of Yahweh. Blessed be His name. Harold, I wish that you would read your Bible.
No, and the fact is, the only reason that we countenance this repeated questioning about the seventh-day Sabbath is it because it is a tremendous teaching that teaches that we are not to trust in any work that we do, like believing or repenting or getting baptized in water or belonging to a congregation, as a means to become saved, as a help to become saved. That's like someone who is picking up a few sticks or who is doing a little bit of work on the seventh. Excuse me, on the seventh-day Sabbath. So, and that's why it is called a perpetual and eternal law. It goes right on through to the end of the world. That salvation is altogether by the work of God. And the moment that we work on the seventh day spiritually, not literally at all, but that is the moment that we put some trust in what I have done to become and had helped me to become saved, it guarantees that we're still going to be under the wrath of God. And so it is a very, very, very important law. It's one of the most important laws. Well, everything is important, of course, in the Bible, but it is the key that shows us that we are not to trust anything we have done in order to try to become saved, because if we do, we are guaranteed to be under the wrath of God. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum. Welcome to Open Forum.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead with your call, please.
Yes, Father Camping, I wanted to thank you for your program. It's really transformed my life. I'm calling in particular because your program and other programs never mention the possibility of somebody being saved and having proof. And I wanted to know that if something did happen and somebody did have proof of angels descending and they had a photograph of that, why does the church never, he can't be the only one. There has to be people out there that...
Well, now, excuse me.
How come the church never talks about these things?
Yeah, well, now the fact is that we do read in John. This is what I think what you're referring to in the Gospel of John, chapter 1 or chapter 2. Let me see. Jesus is talking to Nathanael, who is he's going to make him a disciple, an apostle. And we read in John 1, verse 51, "And he saith unto Nathanael unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." I think that's what you're referring to. Now,
I am, and he was accused of being schizophrenic, and bad things happened to him as a result. So I'm wondering if, why nobody ever talks, why the church never really talks about the possibility and what that would look like and what that would mean, so that people are more comfortable.
Well, now let me explain what God is saying here. First of all, the word angel in the Bible is both in the Hebrew language and in the Greek language. The Old Testament is Hebrew, the New Testament is Greek. Is a word that fundamentally means messenger. And God indicates in the Bible that there are three possibilities of what a messenger is. It can be a human being, it can be an angel. The word angel is that word that is translated messenger, or it can be God himself, because Christ, for example, is called the messenger of the covenant. And we can't tell which just by reading that word. It's Malach in the Old Testament and Angelus in the New Testament. We can't tell from that word itself. Is it talking about an angel, or is it talking about a human being, or is it talking about God? We have to examine the context. Now, here in verse 51, he's saying, "Hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God." Now, when we finally work out what this verse is talking about, the angels are those who become believers. We are the messengers of God to bring the gospel. You can't see an angel anyway. They're a spirit being. You can't see an angel. They are a spirit being. You can't see a spirit. Just like when we die, our soul is a spirit, a part of us, and nobody can see that soul leaving the body and going up to heaven. Now let's go. No, excuse me. Let me finish this. Now, this angel, these messengers, why are they ascending and descending upon the Son of Man? In this context, the Son of Man is Christ. You see, when we become saved, instantly we are seated with Christ in the heavenlies. That is, we reign with him. And so upon the fact that Christ saved us as a true believer, we ascend into heaven spiritually, not physically or literally. And then instantly, as it were, we're commanded to be an ambassador of Christ to represent the kingdom of God to this world. So where do we have to do that? In this world. So it's like we descend out of heaven, again on the fact that Christ has saved us. It's on him. And so this verse is not talking at all about angels. It's talking about what happens when we become saved. And it's, of course, to be understood entirely spiritually. It's not a physical situation that is described. But thank you for calling and sharing this interesting question. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what heaven is going to be like?
Can you tell what happened?
What heaven will be like?
Oh, I have no way to tell you at all. I have no way to tell you except that, well, I can at least say some things that we know. There's no sin. There is no testing to see once whether we might fall into sin. When we go to the new heaven and the new earth, as all the true believers will, we will be there eternally. There's no death of any kind. There's no sorrow. There's no suffering. And we will be joint heirs with the Lord Jesus, that is, co-owners of the new heaven and the new earth. We will be reigning with Him in some way. And so it is way, way, way more mysterious and glorious than our human minds are able to anticipate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hi, Mr. Campion. How are you tonight? Hello?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you.
Great. I had a question. I just wanted to get your opinion on James 2.
James 2. You want James 2. And which verse?
Verse 14.
Verse 14. What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works? Can faith save him? Now, what is your question?
Well, I just wanted to get your opinion on that, and then I have a comment after that.
I'm sorry? Could you repeat that?
I wanted to get your opinion on that statement.
Well, you see, faith itself is work. We read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, the work of faith. Faith is work, but the evidence of faith is that work is done. Christ, for example, is the very essence of faith. In fact, God gives him the name faithful. We find that in Revelation and in the book of Revelation, because he did all the work to save those that he planned to save, and there was an enormous amount of work that was done. He had to die. First of all, he had to be laden with all the sins of these people, and then he had to be found guilty by God, and he had to be killed by God, and he had to be buried, and he had to rise again. All of that work the fact is that he faithfully did what God commanded him to do, what his appointment was, to be our Savior. And so faith without it, if someone says faith, it's like, and has no work connected with it, then it's like something that is just ethereal or ephemeral. It's just like a cloud. There's nothing there, no substance, as near as we can tell. But faith has a lot of substance. And finally, when God saves us and we believe on Him, the substance is that from that point on, we will do all kinds of good works. And a good work is obeying any command of God. And if we say I know I have become a believer, and we don't have an intense desire to do the will of God, which is the work that is expected when we become saved, then we have not experienced salvation. We have not experienced faith or believing. God has not given us salvation at all.
The Bible seems to explain that a little different, and this is where the confusion's coming in when you say faith is a work. When you read 15, which is the very next verse, of the same chapter 2, James chapter 2, verse 15, right up to 26. It gives a full explanation of faith and works as being two totally different things, which you do seem to agree with to a certain degree, but at the same time, you confuse it, or the issue gets confused by the introduction of saying the work of faith, which I believe a few months ago I did call to tell you that you can't say the work of faith makes faith work, because the Bible clearly states that faith without works is dead.
Well,
and
yes, excuse me.
If you read further on, if you wouldn't mind, just read 15 to 26, and then we can, I'll love to hear your explanation. It would it's all for all of us to benefit, hopefully.
And what God is teaching here, if we could summarize, is simply conversation has no substance. You can say a lot of nice things to somebody, do this and do that and so on, and if you're not going to back it up with some substance, it has no value at all. But when Christ made us believers, that was His faith, it contained great substance. It was not just conversation. It is the fact that He gave us, He paid for every sin that we'd ever commit. Secondly, He gave us a new eternal soul in which we will live with Christ forevermore. So there was all kinds of work in evidence because we are saved by the faith of Christ. And that is the kind of material that the book of James is teaching us. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Good afternoon, Mr.
Thank you.
Ken.
Go ahead with your call.
My call is coming from the book of Acts, chapter 13. Actually, you can read where Paul actually Saul, because before his name was changed, and Barnabas.
Acts 13 and which verses?
The individual. They killed the individual. My question is, Mr. Ken, because you're pretty fast at it, why don't they speak of Barnabas anymore, and why did they remove his gospel?
Why don't they speak of Barnabas anymore?
Yes. Read the passage.
And why? Yes. Well,
and then you'll see the two of them before he got his name changed, Mr. Ken. You're very clever and a wise guy.
They did not remove his gospel. Barnabas was a very personal friend of Paul, and they were the first missionaries that were sent out from Antioch into what we call Asia Minor, and up toward Greece and up toward those countries in that area. And then after the first missionary journey that went very well, then they began to make plans for a second one, and then Barnabas wanted to take with him a nephew of his named John Mark, and Paul did not think that would be wise. He thought it would be better that just the two of them went, but Barnabas insisted, and so finally they were really contending with each other. And in the process of writing about this, God gives us also some very important words that help us in other passages. But anyway, the fact is, Barnabas' gospel was not different than Paul's. There's no evidence of that. It's just that then Barnabas continued in his missionary journey with John Mark, and Paul went in on his missionary. He took another man named Silas, and so it actually ended up in getting 4 missionaries out into the field rather than only 2 missionaries. It turned out well, but it did not speak in any negative way about Barnabas. Now, God did not speak further about Barnabas, not because he was not accepted or anything, but because God has other things to tell us in the Bible that involve Paul.
If I told you I had that scroll for that gospel, would you be willing to read it for your people? Because I think, Mr. Canton, that these are the last days, and I think I am chosen as well as you are. I would be willing on mailing it to you. We can talk after the show, and maybe people will know that God's coming back, perhaps on your day, but I have that gospel.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we're not able to do that. But now we're going to go to our next caller. Welcome to Open Forum. Welcome to Open Forum.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead with your call.
Yeah, Brother Campen?
Yes.
Isaiah 33, hold up. Isaiah 33, 14 and 15.
Isaiah 33. Let's look at that. Isaiah 33. Verses 14 and 15, there we read, "The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of the rocks. Bread shall be given him. His water shall be sure," and so on. Now, what is your question?
The people who teach hell, they only go to Isaiah 33:14, but the next verse, it sounds like the people who are saved will be with the everlasting fire of God without being hurt by God.
Verse 15, "He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth," well, that's what I read.
Yes. Yes. The people, it's the saved people who have conscious existence in the everlasting fire.
Oh, I see. You're looking at the word everlasting fire. Well, you know, the Bible defines that later on. Whenever we read passages, anything, anywhere in the Bible, we have to check through the whole Bible to find how the Bible guides us into understanding what is being indicated. And here, when we look at everlasting burnings, we immediately think of, God defines that in Jude, verse 7, where God uses the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of everlasting burnings. We read there in Jude, verse 7, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." And that's everlasting burnings. And we find that kind of a phrase sprinkled all through the Bible. But here God defines it. He says, "Now I destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and the other two cities, Admah and Zeboam, and they are an example of everlasting fire." Well then, should we then, if everlasting fire means that the fire is going to burn and burn and burn, then we know where Sodom and Gomorrah were located. There's no question at all about that. And yet there's no cities there burning and burning and burning. That fire went out shortly after. And so God is defining the phrase everlasting burnings or everlasting fire. It does not mean the fire goes on forevermore. It means that which is burned up is everlastingly destroyed. And this is a tremendous, and God insists on Sodom and Gomorrah is an example so that we can have no doubt at all. It is guiding us to how we are to understand anything that talks about eternal destruction. We know that it has to do with not the fire continuing forever, but that we who are suffering eternal fire will be destroyed forever and ever and ever, will never come into existence again. And that fits with Isaiah, where it says the present earth will never be remembered or come into mind. It does not. It'll be totally annihilated. And there are all kinds of verses in the Old Testament that speak about annihilation. Everything is finally going to be annihilated. But thank you for calling and sharing, and we're going to have to pause now for a message. We're continuing with the Open Forum, and shall we take our next caller, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hello, Brother Camping. How are you this evening?
Very well, thank you.
Yes, I'd like to offer 3 verses that we haven't looked at on the Open Forum in a long time, which tie in Noah with Judgment Day and feature the numbers 1 and 7,000. If we could please take a look at Genesis 6:13, please.
Genesis 6:13. Let's look at that. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Okay, next, if we could look at Jeremiah 25:33, please.
Yes, Jeremiah 25, verse 33. We read Jeremiah 25.
33.
The whole chapter is speaking about Judgment Day there, and in verse 33 we read, and the slain of Jehovah shall be at that day from one end of the earth, even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be dung, that is manure, upon the ground.
Yes. Now the last verse is Revelations 11:13, please.
Revelation 11:13. There when we turn to that, we read, and the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. Now, what is your question?
My question is that if you see the connection between these 3 verses, we have the great earthquake. We're speaking about Judgment Day, and we also feature the number 7,000 in Revelations 11, and even 1 is mentioned in Revelation in Jeremiah 25:33. From one end of the earth even unto the other end, from Noah's day until Judgment Day, from one end to the other end. And then here in Revelations 11:13, I mentioned 7,000 men. I was wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, well, they're all, of course, intimately related. And, in Revelation 11, where it talks about a 10th part of the city fell, God frequently used the 10th as a tithe, as an indication of the whole, just like our tithe. God, when God spoke of 10% or 1/10, but actually it was a picture of bringing our whole life to God and making it available in His service. And here at a 10th part of the city fell, it simply means the whole world will be destroyed. And in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000. Isn't it curious that in this year, their population of the world will be 7 billion at some moment during this year. And God only knows the exact moment, because no census is that accurate. But at some moment in this year, there will be exactly 7 billion people. And there you see that word 7. It's the 7,000 who will fall are the complete fullness, the complete situation of all of those who remain unsaved. They will all be destroyed in the day of judgment. But thank you for calling and sharing, and you in response again to our callers' verses, it shows that in Genesis or Jeremiah or Revelation, and there's also many other chapters, we find reference to the same terrible thing that we're facing right now in just another 123 days. But shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, Brother Camping?
Yes.
Good evening, and thank you for taking my call. My verse is Malachi chapter 4, verse 5.
Malachi chapter 4. Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. We read there, Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Jehovah. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Now, what is your question?
Yes, my question is, how does that relate spiritually and to the coming of the Lord? And what would that be a sign that we should be watching for, or is that just a spiritual meaning there?
Well, first of all, in its most direct understanding, we know that this is referring to John the Baptist. If we go to Luke chapter 1, verse 17, we find there where God is saying in Luke 1, verse 17, and speaking to Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, and that well, let me start with verse 14 or verse 13. The angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. And then amongst other things he says, and many, in verse 16, and many of the children of Israel shall he turn to the Lord their God, and he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And that fits almost perfectly with Malachi chapter 4. Now, he does speak about there's a prophet coming, or in verse 5, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Jehovah. And so it seems like there is also a double meaning to these verses, and that would be speaking of all the true believers of our day who are warning the world that Judgment Day is coming, and telling people that they have to just cry out to God for mercy, which is what is happening today as we warn the world about Judgment Day. But thank you for calling and sharing. Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hello, how you doing tonight?
Very well, thank you.
I want to look at Haggai chapter 2, verse 4.
Haggai chapter 2, verse 4. Let's turn to that. Chapter 2, verse 4. Now be strong, O Zerubbabel, saith Jehovah, and be strong, O Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and be strong, all ye people of the land, saith Jehovah, and work, for I am with you, saith Jehovah of hosts, according to the word that I covenant with you when ye came out of Egypt. So my Spirit remaineth among you, fear ye not. Now, what is your question?
I was wondering if you could explain more on when it says, and work, in verse 4. Could you explain that, please?
And work, for I am with you. Work is doing the will of God. Whenever we obey the Bible, whenever we do anything in obedience to what God has declared, we are doing spiritual work. Like when we believe, when we love, when we make sure that we don't fall into sin of any kind, this is all work that we are doing.
And it's God helping us through that?
Oh, yes. Remember what we read in Philippians chapter 2, for work out your own salvation, that is the salvation that God has provided for you, with fear and trembling, for it is God who worketh in you to do will and to do of his good pleasure. So we can't take any credit. If we really have a desire to want to do the will of God and a great zeal for that, we can't say, look how holy I am. We have to say, all I can do is thank God that he is motivating me and working through me, because I would never do it of myself.
Right. So it's salvation belongeth unto the Lord.
It's all together of God, all together. And that's why the life of a true believer ought to be a life of praise, constant praise. Oh, Lord, thank you. Thank you for your mercies. Thank you for your blessings, because we don't deserve any of it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Good afternoon, Mr. Campy. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm well. I wanted to talk to you about Daniel 12. You talk about people dying and then there is no consciousness left. But in Daniel 12, it talks about Daniel going to sleep and then coming back again. And it also talks about the people that are going to be raised for retribution.
You're talking about Daniel 12, verse 1, where we read, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt.
Right.
Right.
So if once you die, you no longer have consciousness, how are you going to wake to everlasting shame and contempt?
Because we have to read this in the light of everything else. Now notice it says, being raised to everlasting shame and contempt. And the word contempt is also a word that associates entirely with the idea of shame. And remember that the Bible teaches that the graves will open and the people will be thrown out of the graves, and they will be like dung, like manure on the ground. They will be, those bodies or those bones or whatever's left will be desecrated. They will have risen. They were in the tomb. They will have risen. But there's not one word that they are alive in order to stand for judgment or something of that. They have to come to life again, and that is not taught anywhere in the Bible. They are resurrected They are raised out. And you remember in Ezekiel chapter 37, God talks to the bones as if they are alive. It's really surprising when you look at Ezekiel. Let's turn to that a minute. In Ezekiel 37, I think it is, we read where God is saying, Ezekiel 37, in verse 4, or verse 3, and he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Lord God, thou knowest. Again he said unto me, Prophesy unto these bones, and say unto them, O ye dry bones, hear the word of Jehovah. Now, have they come to life again? No. Those bones can hear the word of Jehovah. They are, as it were, sleeping, but they are going to be thrown out. It was God's plan that they are going to come forth to be shamed, and to be shamed means their remains, whatever it is, their bones or their corpses, whatever was thrown out, will be desecrated in the eyes of God. Just like Christ, when he was hanging on the cross, he was cursed. He was shamed in the eyes of God, demonstrating that is an integral part of the wrath of God. Now, that doesn't mean that these people who were thrown out have come to conscious existence. There's nothing that teaches that. Nothing at all. It is only that it's part of the finality of God's judgment. That is, they will be shamed, and then finally they will be annihilated. They'll be entirely destroyed, and then the judgment process is completed. But thank you for...
Hello?
You. Yes.
Yes, explain to me the second death that the Bible talks about.
Well, the second death, that's another question, but I will quickly...
You have to come to consciousness and be alive in order to die a second time, don't you?
The second death is the end, the completion of the judgment that it's annihilation. That is spoken of as the second death. It is not that they're alive again. It is that it's completion of God's judgment plan. It's the lake of fire that is called the second death, the whole judgment process. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, evening, Brother Kevin. How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Yes. Can you please turn to the Matthew chapter 24, verse 22?
Matthew 24, verse 22. Let's look at that. Matthew 24, verse 22, we read, And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. Now, what is your question?
What does it mean, those days? How are those days shortened? What does that mean?
Well, this is a very good question, and I'll tell you, I struggled a long time with this, and it's what got me into trouble when I wrote the book 1994, because this is the verse that I didn't understand. The fact is that God talks about a great tribulation that would go on for 8,400 days, which is exactly a full 23 years. And it starts out, the first 2300 days there's virtually no one being saved anywhere in the whole world, in the churches or anywhere. And so that's the way it began, the Great Tribulation, and if it would continue that way all the way to the end of the 8,400 days, then it would mean that any babies that were born during that 8,400 days would absolutely no possibility of having become saved, and it would and there was a great many people born in that final 17 years, approximately 17 years. And so for the sake of those that God still had to save, because they were elected by God from before the foundation of the earth to be included in the saved, God shortened the 8,400 days to 2,300 days, and then he began the plan of salvation again, a great multitude that we read about in Revelation 7, a large crowd that still were to become saved during that final 17 years. And that is what is in view here in those days being shortened, the days of the awful situation that prevailed the first 2,300 years of the 23-year period of the Great Tribulation. And that's what got me into trouble in 1994, because I assumed that the 23-year period would be shortened to 2,300 days, and that landed in 1994, and I did not understand at that time there was still a salvation plan, an ingathering that God still had to do. And but I knew that the end would have to ordinarily deal with 2011. And then later on, I understood that accurately.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hi, Brother Camping.
Yes.
It must have been about 10 years ago or so that I asked you about a verse in Luke, and you didn't have an answer for me. You didn't have an understanding of that one. And I want to ask you again with your understanding now, if you have any understanding on this verse, and also look at a verse in Isaiah that seems to be harmonizing with it, but I'm not necessarily positive, but it sure does seem to be the same thing, and that's Luke 21:11.
Luke 21:11. Let's look at that. Luke 21:11. And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven.
And now look at Isaiah 66:15.
Isaiah chapter 56, verse 15.
No, 66.
66, verse 15.
Correct.
Let's turn to that. 66, verse 15. There we read, "For behold, Jehovah will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by a sword will Jehovah plead," that means judge, "with all flesh, and the slain of Jehovah shall be many." Now, what is your question?
Well, what I notice in Isaiah is that use of the word chariot, and that word is Merkabah, which is only used in the Old Testament to speak of chariots that men use. It isn't the other one, Rekeb, that is usually used also as a dual meaning for millstone and other meanings. But this one here is only used to mean literal physical chariots. And I'm wondering, why would he say that these chariots come with God from heaven?
Well, first of all, if we look at Isaiah 66, verse 15, it is not talking about literal fire. God is talking about judgment, and he constantly uses fire, not because there will be literal fire, but because God speaks of himself as a consuming fire. You find that in Hebrews chapter 13. He is a consuming fire. And a fire is something that is totally destroyed. He's in another place. He is called destruction. These are terms that God applies to himself to indicate the the character of his wrath, but it does not talk about literal fire. That is insofar as until we get to the very last day when everything will be destroyed by fire. But until that, there's no evidence of fire that will particularly stand out. And so the same way with chariots, God uses chariots in different ways. And remember when Elijah was caught up, he was caught up in a chariot of fire, and that again is emphasizing that. Well, I don't want to get into that because that's another subject. But the fact is, chariots are used in various ways, and they do identify with God coming in judgment. Now, in Luke 21, verse 11, there we read, "A great earthquake shall be." Now, we have to get the context. It begins in verse 7. And they asked him, saying, "Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass?" Then he said, "Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. Go ye not therefore after them. But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified. For these things must first come to pass, but the end is not yet, but is not by and by. That is, it's not close. Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. That's been going on for all through the New Testament history. And great earthquakes shall be in different places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you, and so on. In other words, it's really describing the things that have been happening off and on all through the New Testament era. Every year brings some kind of special pestilence or some big earthquake or some tsunami or some the dreadful things are constantly developing.
I'm concentrating on that frightful sight. You know, that it's phobia. That word phobia is used for frightening, and it seems to be saying that there's something that is going to be frightening. You know, I don't have any other way to describe what I'm seeing when I read that there's something that people are going to see. I'm just trying to figure out what that is.
Well, the fact is we have to read anything in its context, and the context is talking about what we can expect all through the New Testament era. And this was written at the beginning of the New Testament era, and we've seen these things every time. I mean, when like today, we have great floods in Argentina and in Brazil. And a year ago, we had a terrific earthquake that devastated Haiti, and then before that, a couple of years ago, we had a tsunami that destroyed thousands of people. But now I have to say good night. I'm sorry, we can't go on.